an old picture of Peter Jennings, or I should say a young picture of Peter Jennings. And finally, space at this particular time, space coverage was always CBS and that gentleman there, Walter Cronkite. Now, it would be these networks. There's no cable. ABC, NBC, CBS. They're going to be covering the space launches. They're going to be covering the recoveries. Okay? And I'm sure many of you, while you were in grade school, maybe your teacher, if you were in a Catholic school, the nuns would bring in a TV and you would watch the launchings or the recoveries of the spaceship. So, with that in mind, if we Earthlings, now by Earthlings, it was the Americans and the Soviets. That's it. Okay? The Chinese weren't launching, the Japanese weren't launching, Europeans weren't launching, it was us and the Soviets. So, if we were venturing into space, and if space was so vast, can we make the presumption that if other worlds could exist somewhere out there, would they in fact be venturing into space as well? Okay? And if they do venture into space, and if they do happen to come by planet Earth, then they will be probably in a UFO. Okay? UFO. It's a common term today. We know that. But remember, we have to go back those 50 years. So UFO was an acronym for Unidentified Flying Object. And that's basically an object in the sky that cannot be explained by any scientific theory. Okay? Now, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, the term actually went back to the 1950s. In the OED, the Oxford English Dictionary, there's a small citation that a United States Air Force officer by the name of Edward Ruppelt, R-U-P-P-E-L-T, he was actually the first person to coin that particular term. And this way, what he did by using that term, UFO, he wanted to find a term that could get us away from flying saucers. Because some of these objects aren't saucer-like in the least. Okay? So here we are in 1966, and Flying Saucer Review, UFO Magazine, Flying Saucer Magazine, this was actually getting picked up in American culture. So, here's a small little tidbit. There was a Gallup poll, the organization that takes all these polls. A Gallup poll at this time discovered that 95% of Americans were somewhat familiar with flying saucers. Okay? 95%. And that only 86% ever heard about President Lyndon Johnson. So people knew more about UFOs than their American president. Okay? So, with that in mind, look how it's playing on our culture. Okay? So, what better way to pick up on that culture than to start putting out things that kids can play with? And so the toy market came into play. Okay? Space stations, lost in space robots. There's the G.I. Joe astronaut. Everybody would love a G.I. Joe astronaut with a space capsule yet. How cool is that? Okay. So besides the toys, okay, we have to go back to TV again, entertainment. And how is space coming into our television, coming into our homes besides the news? Well, there's Lost in Space. My Favorite Martian. Jetsons. Dun, dun, dun. No, that's Flintstone. Sorry. Don't know the Jetson theme. Forget it. Okay. Outer Limits. And then finally, Star Trek. So all of these were bringing space. And we were being entertained by space. You know, 1966 was a very big year for UFOs. And in fact, CBS is actually going to create a documentary. This documentary, CBS News, UFO, Friend, Foe, or Fantasy, you can actually watch the entire documentary on YouTube. And it's a fascinating documentary. But again, remember to put yourself back at that time period. Okay? We can't watch it with what we know in 2017, but we have to go and see what it was like back in 1966. CBS, of course, it's going to be hosted by Walter Cronkite. Who else would host it? But here's where a tie-in comes in with our topic tonight. Because as you watch this documentary, it is going to mention the Dexter sightings. You will see Frank Manor being interviewed. You will hear of the Hillsdale incident. And you will also meet Dr. J. Allen Hynek. Okay? Books, magazines, another way to bring space into our lives. And 3 books became bestsellers at this part in 1966 regarding the UFOs. Flying Saucers, Serious Business by Frank Edwards. Incident at Exeter by John G. Fuller. And then Anatomy of a Phenomenon by Jacques Vallée. Okay. Now these are quite old, but if you're interested in them, we can try to see if we have them at the library, see if our library cooperative has it, or we could possibly even get it through a Melcat request if you're interested in that particular book. But the magazines, and we're talking major magazines here. It wasn't UFO Review, and these aren't Flying Saucer magazine. Take a look at some of the titles, okay? There's Saturday Evening Post. As they mention, are flying saucers real? Okay? That came out in December 17th, 1966. Life magazine, April 1st, 1966. The week of the flying saucers. Look magazine, right up there. Okay, October 18th, 1966. Argosy magazine, December 1966. And finally, Popular Science, January 1966. Each and every one of these mentioning something about UFOs. Are they real? And we're not just talking in the U.S. The phenomena is going on worldwide. Okay. In the U.S., in Russia, in Argentina, Canada, England, Chile, excuse me, Norway, Mexico. People are seeing things in the sky. And we're trying to figure out, trying to grasp just what they are. Okay. So as we proceed, let me just point out that this program tonight isn't necessarily designed to prove the existence of UFOs. That's not the purpose of this. It's simply to present you insight to an interesting chapter of Southeast Central Michigan folklore history. Okay? And so with that prelude, we are going to begin 1966, UFOs in Michigan, in the small town of Dexter, Michigan. Okay? Washtenaw County. The day, March 20th, 1966. Evening time, 8:30. And this is going to be taking place between 8:30, 11:30, maybe even all the way up to midnight. Okay. A gentleman by the name of Robert Wagner is actually going to call the Washtenaw County Sheriff's Department. He's the one that starts the ball rolling here. And he basically is going to talk to the person at the Sheriff's Department, and he's going to say that there is a very strange flying object appearing to land in a swampy area. Okay. At the intersection of, let's see here, Quigley and Brand. So Quigley and Brand. So right there. Okay. Now, something that you have to take in mind as we use these particular maps. And this is something that I found a little bit difficult in using these. I'm dealing with an incident that occurred in 1966, 50-some years ago. I keep repeating this and repeating this, I know, but it's something that we need to keep in mind. A Google map of 2017 does not show what was going on land-wise in 1966. So we need to really keep this in mind as we go through, okay? So again, Robert Wagner calls the Sheriff's Department at around 8:30 and says, something's going on in this particular area. Okay. Gentlemen, here, that is Frank Manor. And his son, Ronald. And they actually live like right in this area here. Well, Frank Manor is at home at the time, and he notices this strange object in the swamp area here. And he's going to make a statement that it was on the ground, and it went up about 500 feet, and it came down, and it made all this noise. And according to him, it appeared to be having some difficulty getting up off the ground. Okay. He observed some lights. The lights would change from blue and green to this brilliant red and yellow. Okay. So, along with his son, he decides they're both going to go and investigate. Now, this guy was a hunter. He was a farmer. They knew the land. But Frank also knew that, well, you know something, just in case I'm going to take my kid with me. And so they went out and entered the woods. So as they went out into the woods, Frank's wife is now going to come and describe or contact the Washtenaw Sheriff's Department. Okay. Oops, no, don't tell me it. Oh, okay. So, what we have, the description of the object. This is what they saw. The object was brownish in color, oval-like. It had a quilted pattern on the outside surface. Appeared to be flat on the bottom, cone-shaped on top. It was low in height. Two small lights appeared to be on the outer edge of the object. these would glow from blue and green that would intensify to red. When the object illuminated, it turned into a yellow whitish color. Okay? And that the body appeared to be rough in texture. He also mentioned that we then heard a sound like a whistle, like a bullet ricocheting. The object went up in the air, right over us, and disappeared. Okay? Well, remember, we just called the sheriff's department. And the sheriff's deputies, Stanley McFadden and Dan Fitzpatrick, are actually going to come and participate in this investigation. So what they are going to end up doing is, as they're proceeding this way, at around this area, when they were on North Territorial Road in Mass, somewhere in here, that's the intersection that they mentioned, they stated that they saw something of a brilliant white or red light. Okay? So, we have them moving down North Territorial. As they're moving down, they will state, suddenly a strange lighted object appeared overhead. They turned on their spotlight and aimed it at the object. And this is a quote. From what we could see, the object was as large as a small house. It was kind of pushed down flat. It had red-green lights on it, and its movements, which could not possibly be made by any aircraft I've ever heard of. And they watched it disappear. Okay. So, they finally come down to Quigley and Brand intersection, and they will, in fact, get out and begin approaching the swamp in this direction. Now, remember, we have McFadden and his son are approaching this way. The law enforcement is coming that way. Okay? So, from two particular distinct ways, hopefully to get a better sight of what this object is all about. Now, as Fitzpatrick is going through, he is going to state that as they're going through the swamp, that the glow brightened and dimmed slowly, as those stage lights, like these stage lights, were brightened and dimmed, but he never sees the object. He only saw the lights dimming and getting brighter. Okay? McFadden decides they're actually going to split up. So Fitzpatrick is going to come here, McFadden goes another way, just to try to get observation points on this thing. Both deputies have flashlights, and they're seen by Frank Manor and his son. So Manor knows that the deputies are out there. He sees the flashlights flashing. Okay? Fitzpatrick is going to approach what he believes the source of the glow with his flashlight. But as he's coming up, there's a slight rise in the swamp, just a little hillock. Okay? As he's coming up, the glow disappears, but then yet reappears in another part of the swamp. The motion of the light was always smooth and would follow horizontal and follow the contour of the land. So it wasn't jerky up and down and things like this. It would just be a fluid flowing light. After walking around in the swamp, they decided to come back and head back to their patrol cars. Well, when they returned, there were two other deputies there waiting for them. One deputy, Robert Hunnewell, and then Deputy Buford Bushrow. And they come out of the swamps, and these other two deputies